All right, we are live. Good morning, good afternoon. Happy Sunday, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Glad you all are here in the chat already. I missed you guys last week. Sorry I couldn't make it, but happy to see you all here Sunday. I am going to jump right into our conversation and introduce my guest and do my intro because we've got a good conversation and I want to get started. So this is Miss Bohemian Soul TV. As I introduce myself, I say that I built a kind of fancy tiny house in 2015 because I don't believe you have to give up luxury to go tiny. And since that time, I have shared my journey to hopefully inspire others who are interested in the movement. I do offer coaching and consultations to help others in their tiny house journey. So once this video is live, you'll find all of the links to schedule with me. And as I'm doing all of that, I serve up a lot of representation in the movement. I want us to see ourselves. I want us to be represented. I want us to have all of the experiences and benefits of the tiny house movement. So thank you all for being here. I am very excited about my guest this morning. So I am going to, Kathleen, you didn't, I should have made sure you
I
had,
did.
did you
I
put your,
had it there.
I don't know
I
what,
had it there.
I know. I've got a comment in here. So let me hide it and then you'll see. Okay, there we go. I'm still working on I have a new platform here. Kathleen, please introduce yourself to the audience.
Hi, my name's Kathleen Tunnell Handel, and Jewel and I have befriended each other on Instagram for quite some time. I love what she does, and she's been very supportive of my work. I'm a retired woven textile designer who kind of watched the whole manufacturing industry go out and elsewhere at a great loss to people. And just by happenstance, sort of came back to photography and started photographing in mobile home and manufactured housing communities about 2017. I am not a resident of any community, but I've befriended and advocated for many residents. I've done a lot of research, and I have an extensive body of photographic work, mostly centered initially on place and my delight in how much personality people put outside of their homes, even though the density is really similar to where I live here in a high rise in New York City, with a big difference that I feel like we all kind of hide behind our doors and we hear our neighbors, but we don't want to know anything about them. And I was really entranced by a whole different approach to life, and have become an advocate for the very vulnerable community of people who do live in mobile home and manufactured housing communities, of which there are approximately 22 million Americans of, despite what we all have seen on TV and in the movies, is an incredibly diverse group of people, which I try to represent in my work.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that intro. Thank you for being here. I don't remember when I first started following you. I have a love for obviously the connection with mobile homes and the tiny house community, but I also have a love for the vintage mobile homes and stumbled on your work somewhere on, I think I saw you first on the internet, your photos, and then flew over to Instagram to find you so I could follow you. And I think it's been a while, and just then realized that it was more than, like what you said, more than just the photography. It's also the advocacy that you have within the mobile home community that I just love. And your pictures are fabulous. So it's a win-win for me. As I launch this conversation, I always say that I believe our homes, tiny home, I believe our homes tell a story about us, whether it's intentional or unintentional. And I tend to think that for most people living in tiny homes, small homes, mobile homes, there is so much intent in their decisions to get there, in their journey. Kind of just like what you said about the outside of the house having so much personality and telling a story. So that's what we explore here. That's what I absolutely want to explore in this conversation. And you gave me the perfect segue because you've already started talking about the intention and the difference in the intention in those houses and the high rise in New York. So thank you for that beautiful introduction. And I feel like your work just beautifully captures the history and evolution of mobile homes. What drew you to researching and photographing?
Well, initially, I was really approaching things from a very visual surface approach. Just as I walked through communities, what caught my eye. I never I'm not really sure if there are tiny home communities as much as there are mobile home and manufactured housing communities, but typically homes are very close together and very close to the street. And I would never go on anyone's property. I would photograph from the street, but nonetheless, I was often 10 feet outside of someone's living room window.
Right.
So needless to say, people would come out, and starting in 2017, it was a very different climate for humanity, or in this country in particular. People were definitely a little concerned about what I was doing, but their approach to me often was, what are you doing? And at that time, I was a photography student. So I would say, well, I'm a photography student and I just love what you've done with your home. And I'm just interested in taking pictures. And very often people would be fine with that idea. And of course, some people were not fine. And they would ask me to leave, which I would do. But people, I guess I have a face people feel like they can confide in. And a lot of people started talking to me about their lives, their homes, how they got there, their concerns. And I really pretty quickly realized that there was a lot more to what I was just visually seeing. So I did start reading a lot about the socioeconomics, the history, the demographics, what the American dream really is, and found myself reading a book by a preeminent sociologist out of the University of Colorado in Denver, Dr. Esther Sullivan, who lived in a series of communities while she was doing her thesis that were undergoing eviction. So she really got at sort of the underbelly, which is that the communities are owned by private landowners. They're not owned by the people who live in the homes. They often own their homes, but it's a very unique model of home ownership for this country and the world, in that you can own your home, but it's on rented land.
Right.
And certainly there are people who rent their homes, but it makes them very vulnerable to whoever owns their homes because there's a real lack of protective legislation. People don't recognize it's the largest unsubsidized form of affordable housing in our country. And of course, in this time of complete housing crisis, really critical to enable people to keep in their homes, but that's not what's happening. So,
right. So let's go back. So you said you started researching the history. So we know, let's kind of go back to the beginning. So we know that mobile homes kind of started in the 40s, post the Depression era, around World War II, as low-cost housing, but it was supposed to be temporary housing initially. And then they became like a major player, just like you said, in the affordable housing home ownership conversation. How and why do you think they evolved from what was to be a temporary solution to becoming a key part of American housing?
Well, from what I've read, and I'm no scholar, let me just say right off the bat, I've read an extensive amount, and it seems like, post World War II, we had service people coming back. There were jobs all across. People were starting families. Of course, there was discrimination in how things were distributed, but people found these homes because initially they were smaller and they were actually mobile, that they could actually go with their families to wherever they were finding jobs and settle there. And it sort of became a business model. There was a whole period of time where it was very glamorous to have a trailer. There's a famous Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz movie featuring a trailer. But for most people, it really was just an affordable place to be where they had to be for whatever reason, work, family, etc. And so mobile home communities started being built to, just as there are RV communities now, to really facilitate that.
Right. I think it's an important call out, and you just mentioned it and alluded to it, that it's an important call out that while this was a solution for many white working class families, the mobile homes became an entry point to home ownership and wealth building. But during this time where um, folks who were coming from war, white soldiers coming from war, were able to use their GI benefits, we for home loans, we know that was not the case for Black soldiers and Black families. They were denied use of this same GI Bill they had been promised. The FHA was legally able to discriminate and redline and do all of the things legally. So Black families were being kept out of traditional loans. And then as the mobile home thing was happening, and this was an opportunity for getting into, affordable housing, getting into home ownership. Most of the communities were white only. And so this was something that when people talk about wealth building, this was the foundation for so many white families, the beginning of wealth building, and Black and brown folks were excluded from this conversation from the beginning. And that is the thing that as people, that bootstraps conversation, that is the thing that just kind of really irks me, because if you didn't get the boots or the straps, you can't use them as
Absolutely.
them up. Does that come up? Does that conversation come up in your research? And are people willing to talk about that now? Or is it kind of still being ignored or denied?
Well, again, I'm not a scholar. Redlining is something
You
that now
don't have to
becomes
keep putting that disclaimer out there. We just talk over here like we know everything. I'm just teasing.
okay.
We understand.
Yeah, initially that was definitely the model. It has evolved significantly. So early on in the 40s, 50s, even probably into the 60s, it was sort of a private ownership model. It was, we call it the mom and pop parks. It would be a couple, they had some land, they decided, hey, this would be something they could support, make money off of, and they would build a mobile home park. And that model has completely changed in the last, I don't know, 15, 20 years. It's become a way to exploit people because you do have a captive audience. So as the mom and pop original owners who built the communities wanted to retire and cash out, private equity, of course, has stepped in and monetized, as they do absolutely everything now. And I think it's changed the literally the complexion of who you see in communities and who can live in communities, because at a certain point they are not thinking community. Initially people were building communities. Now
Right.
it's really just, it's a money maker. You have a captive audience. There are investment seminars you can take about, hey, if you just buy a mobile home park,
Right.
they say they're chained to the Waffle House. They are literally unable to, in most cases, move. And yeah, I see one of the comments, someone is mentioning that. And it's just horrifying that the people I meet along the way, having photographed since 2017, it's every kind of American. It's people starting out, it's immigrants, it's non-English speaking people, Black families, white, fairly well-to-do retirees downsizing. It's kind of, it's not everybody. Well, no, even multimillionaires buy trailers now in places that used to be communities, but now they can use them for surf shacks and what have you. But
Right.
so I've met a lot of people of all sorts, and I try to represent that in my work to show what it has become and what we think it is in our media stereotype vision are two different things. So it's really important housing for all kinds of people, but they are mostly all exploited and very fearful because the regulations are so lax and they're so unenforced. Whoever owns the land can treat them however they want to treat them. So
Right.
it's pretty desperate out there.
Right. Yeah, in the 1950s, they were seen as, respectable working class communities, and then this shift started to happen, with more of a negative stigma. I think sometimes folks will blame the decline on zoning laws, neglect as we have started to see it, and then economic shifts. Do you agree with that, or do you think some of that had more to do with race and class as this has started happening?
Well, definitely race and class plays a huge part in my opinion to the stigmatization of people who live in the community, and it's definitely felt in most any community I've been to. Whether on the outside it appears to be very upper middle class, of which there are some. I've been in communities that are beautiful double and triple wides. They have a golf course, a community house. Um, Nonetheless, I've talked so I don't know if I've mentioned, I've started in the last year and a half interviewing community residents to add their voice to the conversation, to edit little video clips that I have a couple of on my website, so that people can hear people who live in the communities. And I do have one friend in California. Her community is beautiful, and she says she still, nonetheless, if she has a plumbing issue and she calls a plumber, conversation's going well, and then they say, "Where do you live?" And she mentions her trailer park, as she calls it, as she says ironically, and suddenly they're like, "Oh, I'm not going there." So
Oh, wow.
yeah.
Wow. Let's take a look. I've got 10 zillion more questions. Let's take a look at your photos and then continue this conversation. And again, I am happy to have you here because I just love looking at your work. So I'm going
Thank
to
you.
share my screen here in, let's see, here we go. All right, there we go. Walk us through what we're looking at.
So this is actually right outside of Los Angeles International Airport. So again, there's just so many misconceptions about communities. This is in urban Los Angeles. I find places to go photograph, walk around, and respond to what I see. So that's sort of, in a nutshell, what this photograph is.
I just
Excuse me.
love the long look down the road. This is gorgeous.
Yeah, and then this is a community in Colorado that there were a lot of, I don't know, in the far right, you could see a little welcome banner. And I wanted this image to really represent the density of a community, but nonetheless, the sense of personality and love of home. I mean, people need to be creative. There's an innate need in all of us to create and personalize, which can be encouraged or squelched. I've actually been in communities where it's forbidden to, as part of them controlling the space. You can't have a shrub outside of your house. You cannot put cute little things. So there's just this high level in some communities of showing who's the boss, and it's not you, which really takes away, of course, from any feeling of security or comfort that you can feel about home. But this community had just, I found out as I was walking along talking to people, had just received some new people into the community, whose community of about 250 people a few miles away, all 250 families had been evicted, and some new members of that community moved into this community and were feeling like they could finally start working on the trauma of losing their homes. I mean, literally walking away from their homes. As somebody said, you get evicted, and depending on the circumstance, they can come lock the door. You lose your bed, your TV, everything in a second with no preparation. But so this had just been bought.
That's ridiculous.
And this to me represents security, that you can put things that you love to see when you come home, plants, whatever, outside of your home, and the little kids' shoes sitting out there, just like a lovely representation of what you would like to feel your community feels like.
It's a welcome home.
Yes, and not to I see the comment about that person who just made a comment feels safe in their community, and that's the ideal, and that's certainly wonderful. And I think a lot of people have felt that, and that's one of the wonderful things about it's actually a zoning enforced thing that communities often only have one or very few entrances. So it has been a model where people felt very community minded and secure. And unfortunately, depending on the ownership, that can change very radically. So yeah, this was one of the first portraits I made of Sandy, just showing, you know, people are people, no matter where they live, who they are. And I just love the mysterious blue glow from the window down the entryway.
Yes.
Like a portal. And just, this is in Texas, and you know, it's a vintage home, obviously, which needless to say, my eye is drawn to, but just the fact that, you know, somebody has this little piece of land and they are going to make the most of it in the way they want to. Just that to me does represent security and home and love of your home in a way that is very rarely represented in the media.
Yeah, the intention that we were talking about.
Exactly. This is a couple I've met a couple of times. I photographed in their community, Kim and Jake. I love them. She's very artistic, as you can tell, and they love each other, as you can tell. And one of my favorite pictures that you might pop up or might not, it's actually the one behind me, is of the front of their house and what she'd done to it that I love. So
okay,
yeah.
I love that tree. That braided tree.
Exactly, whatever. I mean, she just has a knack for taking things and making a great statement. And see a lot of, as people maybe, I don't know if it's disrespectful to say a Mary in a clamshell, just as I think it's great when people feel comfortable. And unfortunately, mostly what I do see is representations of Christian religions outside of homes, but people who feel comfortable putting their beliefs out there, particularly if they are not against other people. That's always a challenge when.
Right. Yeah.
This is Angela. She was wonderful to welcome me into her home, and I had a great conversation. I've interviewed her about her experiences in the community and just the way she's decorated her home, and her whole beautiful self. It's very evident.
Yeah, absolutely. She's got some flair for sure.
Oh, so this is the front of the home I was describing. So this is Kim and Jake's, and just like the combination of things is so fun and stunning and artistic, and just says much about
a hodgepodge of decor.
Yes. And this is obviously California. I have my son lives outside of Los Angeles, so I end up photographing there quite often. And just to show, you know, people say, oh, mobile homes, but to show with the homes, with those giant trees, they're really not that mobile, and that's part of the problem. If you can find a place that would take an older home like this, which is very unlikely because of zoning, what it would cost to get it out of there is often beyond the bankroll of most people who would own a home like that.
Right.
And this I just love. Literally, I was standing in the street. This is how close their living room window is, but just the little touches are so enchanting to me.
Yeah.
This is Karen, and it was a pretty spontaneous portrait she agreed to. And again, I guess part of what I'm saying is when you feel secure enough in the space around your home that you can express whatever you want to express about yourself, that to me is kind of the ideal. Georgia. I just loved the combination of the hip waders, the sign saying that you're being watched. There's also a sign, something to do with guns, like
I see,
threatening. And then in the garden that's under the flagpole, there's an assortment of objects besides the plants, and one of them is a bust head of Beethoven. So just the combination was to me just great.
They're definitely across the board in their interest and likes.
Exactly. And of course, the American flag.
Yes.
I see a lot of American flags,
Yeah.
but better that than some other flags.
Well, I was just going to say, out here where I am, I'm in an area that is zoned for mobile homes, and this area is, and I have said this, that the American flag out here has now become the new Confederate flag. It's there's so many more. They're representing something else, not just pride in America. So they're all mixed in with the Trump flags and the Confederate flags, and it is now representative of something else.
I know. And I don't know, I often say to myself, it's a failure of marketing on the part of the other party that we haven't figured out how to reclaim messages like, no, this is all of our flags and it's not just your flag.
Right.
So this is Carmen and her son in California, and the incredible things her husband has built and planted outside of their home. And it's always, it's really bittersweet because I look at this, I live in New York City. I look at this and go, oh my gosh, this is fabulous. And so many little boutique restaurants, if they could have this look, would have so many people coming to eat in it. And she was apologizing. And, there's just this sense of not being enough from people who live in mobile homes because they've heard so often
right
terrible things.
Right. So a horse saddle, it does look like an outdoor restaurant,
doesn't it? I mean, just there were so many little touches that you can't even see, and it was just like, I would come eat a meal here in a heartbeat.
Exactly.
And just a reminder of, children live in the communities, a little bit of Christmas lights in this place in Georgia, but also the fact that mobile homes in a lot of places are considered chattel. So it's more like a car than a home. So the stickers are like what you would put on your car for registration.
Right.
And that makes the whole borrowing, getting a mortgage to buy a home, very convoluted process that often the companies that make loans available, you can't get a government loan. They only will loan to the developers. The loan companies that will loan for these kinds of homes, when you really trace down, are often owned by the same company who's trying to sell you the home. So you can think you're doing your due diligence, but you're really screwed.
Yeah.
Sorry.
On both ends.
Yes. These are people that I was invited to. There's a wonderful nonprofit advocacy group that I've allied myself called MH Action.
Okay.
It's a national group. It used to stand for Mobile Home Action, now stands for Manufactured Housing Action. And I was invited to their annual gathering in DC, where they go to learn how to lobby and then go to the Capitol to lobby on behalf of people all across the country who live in mobile manufactured housing communities. And anyway, so these were some of the attendees. I did a little presentation on my website. I have a little video that shows what I'm trying to do with my work. And I had a pop-up exhibition of my work in the meeting room. And then I set up a little studio and these are the first people that I interviewed. I now have about 50 interviews. I'm sort of wading my way through, but just to show, really the purpose of this, besides the grids that I have as part of my art work, just to show it's all kind of people, it's all ages, it's all, some people have lived in America, their ancestors, for hundreds of years, and others have just arrived. And
yeah. I want to talk about the fires in just a minute. I did see somebody mention about the community in Cali. One of the things that I think is evident in some of your pictures, as well as just kind of knowing mobile home parks across the country, some of the mobile home parks, particularly in the West, seem to have retained more of a middle class reputation, while those in the South often seem more as lower income or rundown or, associated with extreme poverty. What do you think kind of accounts for this, the regional divide?
I don't know. That's an interesting question, and I know a lot of before private equity got involved in this space, just regular public equity stock selling companies were involved. And I kind of have evolved a theory that some of the communities that were bought earlier on, like Warren Buffett's companies, are huge owners of mobile home and manufactured housing. You know, he's supposed to be this great philanthropist, yet,
Right.
but a lot of his communities are publicly traded. And I kind of feel like that at least gives them a little bit more accountability, because as I know, one of the fellows I interviewed from the MH Action National Gathering had been involved with MH Action for quite some time. And he actually had bought one share of stock to be able to go to one of whatever the corporate name, I'm drawing a blank, but of Warren Buffett's company. He went to a meeting, and so he could actually talk to powers that be about what was going on in his community. And with private equity, you can't do that anymore. So some of the blue chip communities, if you will, that I've seen, as you say, out on the West Coast with the clubhouse and the golf course. I mean, first of all, any place with a clubhouse or a community gathering spot brings neighbors together in a way that they can organize and discuss and try to figure out if there's a problem, what to do about it, in a way that if you're in a smaller, less well-funded community, it's much easier to pit people against each other and make them suspicious of each other. So I'm not sure that I'm 100% answering your question, but sort of out west.
That's part of it. I wanted to ask that of you, just because I know you've had more exposure research across the country. For as I've looked at kind of the communities, like especially like the California community, to me it also seems like a lot of that is drawn on the race and class line as to how those communities fare and how they're perceived.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. But nonetheless, I mean, I've gone into communities that are predominantly white and on the outside look like ranch houses, and they look, very upper middle class, if you will. People are nonetheless, I mean, there are a lot of people on fixed incomes. They are terrified because the rent increases are not, if they are at all controlled by the regional government or the state government, they're not enforced. And, if you get hit with a 6%, 20%, 50% increase in your lot rent every year, it doesn't even matter where you came from, it's out of your budget. And you're not going to be able to survive paying that. So
yeah,
I think it's maybe more visually apparent, and certainly, for example, South Carolina has, when you look at where communities are located, South Carolina has the highest percentage of people living in mobile home and manufactured housing communities.
I didn't know
So there's so many layers that go into how a community looks. Like, there are a lot of private owners, of course, that aren't really nice people. And
right.
yeah.
Right. Like I said, someone did mention the community. I know you're very connected to the California community. I think I remember seeing a post on your page as to some thoughts that you had around how and why the impact was for that community that was just decimated. Am I remembering that correctly with the fires?
Well, I don't know. So there are two communities in the greater Los Angeles area that are connected to one another on the coast that I've photographed extensively since 2017. And if anybody's from those communities and is listening or knows anyone, I'd love to connect with them, because I'm really trying to get out there to photograph, but it's in a no-go zone. I think I was partially focused on the fact that the communities, like, people were living on the ocean, and they were living in, some of them, the homes were from 1950s. I mean, it was sort of, because of the climate in California, it doesn't deteriorate the metal structures like a mobile and manufactured home in Maine, for example, or in Florida, just where the environment is much more hostile. So those communities, what I had partially said was that they were, to me, especially Pacific Palisades Bowl, it was like the whole history of mobile homes encompassed in one community, both in terms of the structures. They went from, the tiny trailers that initially had started out. I know Barbara Corcoran, I'd love to get in touch with her about this, but to all the way up to what people are doing now to try to account for, with climate change and the rising sea levels, people were starting to build higher and higher and higher in terms of vertically to be above flood level.
Right.
I don't really have any theories. I mean, that devastation is obviously a horrible convergence of environmental factors, and the fact that, you combine 100-mile-an-hour winds with flying embers and a tinder dry environment. There was nothing anybody could have done, and these communities just happened to have succumbed like so many others out there. And I just feel badly because a lot of people stop paying insurance because, floodplain, fire, whatever. So when they're wiped out, well, and not only are you wiped out of your home, but the person who actually owns the land, I'm sure, I don't really know, but if you're a landowner with beachfront property,
Right.
And suddenly all your obligations are wiped away.
Yeah. That's the concern.
Who's going to stop you from
Absolutely.
and say, no, you have to rebuild that community for the people who live there?
Absolutely. That's the main concern. That is so much of a big concern for those folks, and it is terrible. It's also the same conversation for, and the name is escaping me right now, for the Black community, the long-standing Black community that is
Altadena.
Thank you. That same conversation for them and their housing. I'm excited to see that there are several wealthy, I think it's athletes and things, stepping up to help the folks in Altadena be able to rebuild. Because you're right, that's going to be a prime area for folks with money to swoop in and try to capitalize on all of this, all of the harm.
Yes, and they're fast. I mean, unfortunately, by the time the government gets around to making any restriction on anything, a lot of it's already been swooped up.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. You were just, we were just talking about this, and I keep seeing so many stories about folks who, the conversation of, you own the mobile home, but you don't own the land. And then somebody is coming in and buying the land, and they're then losing the house because they don't have the ability to move their house. And that is kind of one of the differences in the tiny house conversation, but it is the more of the flexibility, ability to move the house. But it is just a nightmare as you read those stories where people have lived there for so many years, and now they're just losing everything because they don't have the financial ability to move the house. And then from a zoning perspective, there's really nowhere to move the house.
Yeah, it's really a very unique and unfortunate, kind of horrifying situation. There's a community I've visited a number of times in upstate New York from me. I don't know, but initially it was a community of older homes and, I don't know, 100-foot tall pine trees and hardwood trees, and just had a certain look to it. And it was bought by a private equity company. And I think the community had maybe about 205 homes. And they decided to redevelop the community, which unfortunately they can get federal funding to do because they're improving affordable housing by doing so. And they got rid of, so they sort of did it, it was like a virus or something. They got rid of communities are often in rows by the street. Mm-hmm. They just marched through and got people out all the way along, cut the trees down, crunched the homes up, and just kind of moved through all the rows in a pretty devastating fashion. and put in these as one remaining person that's further down hasn't been hit yet. The barracks, they're like soulless homes, so tight together. Nobody has, practically a flower outside. It's just, and I think most people who it used to be homeowners are now renters, so they're flipping it to a more controllable population. So you don't pay your rent, boop. You don't want to pay this rent, boop. So it's just, it goes from being a community very quickly to just a place that you live until you can't afford to live there, and then I don't know where you're going. But
yeah, the intention in, so I talk about that here a lot. The intention in zoning, the restrictive clauses with zoning that we know, if we take it all the way back, how and why it was written, to keep folks out of certain areas. And at the point when it was initially established, they could actually say it, that you can't some of the clauses could say you can't sell to a Black person, or the zoning could say they didn't want Black people in this area. And then when it became illegal, they had to kind of redo it and take that out. But the intent still was the underlying, because it is to keep folks out and keep folks in a certain area. So that just, I think it goes back. And so Kathleen and I had a conversation, like we had a whole show in our conversation about a week or so ago, on Zoom. And I was like, we should have just recorded this, but
ditto.
it is, it is like so much of the foundation of the country is wrought in inequity, in racism, and we all know right now that it's not going in any direction of improvement. But it just really needs to all be torn down and rebuilt so that folks can have half a chance outside of the wealthy.
Yes, I'm afraid. Well, it is being torn down, but I'm not sure it's going to be advantageous to who we would like it to be advantageous to.
Absolutely not. The tearing down that's happening right now is absolutely not for the people.
Yes.
That's funny. This is an aside. I am trying to finish up my sunroom space, and I had a guy come over, and he was doing the painting, and I don't know what got into him, but he just launched in, I think after introductions, he launched into talking about what was happening in the country and how happy he was. And I was like, sir, if you want to keep this job, that's not what you want to talk about this morning. And I wanted to say, dude, read the room, because whose house are you?
Right.
Like this is not what we're talking about. And if I hate painting. I don't hate painting, but I just knew a better use of my time and money was to spend the money to hire a professional. But as I'm sitting there looking at him thinking, are you serious right now? And I'm thinking, I really want to fire you, but I also don't want to paint this room. That's why I just said, sir, if you want to keep this job, this isn't what we need to talk about right now. And it was just,
well, did he stop?
He stopped immediately. But for me, it was just like, are you so oblivious to who you're standing here talking to that you can't understand how that would be offensive and not something you'd want to talk to me about?
Well, isn't that the root of the problem, though?
Like, absolutely. Not having
can't you see?
Outside. Absolutely. Not having to think outside yourself. Absolutely. Yes. I want to take this conversation and kind of tie it more into the tiny home conversation. For so long as I've been in this movement, so I've been here 10 plus years, and some of the conversations for me have been offensive, from within the tiny house movement, and which is kind of how I started doing the work that I'm doing, because there were so many things that folks didn't want to be associated with. And one of the main things was the unhoused. They didn't want the tiny house movement to be associated with the stigma of homelessness and the unhoused. And that was just like, are y'all kidding me right now? Like, who needs housing more than people who don't have housing? Like, you're selling a house to live in a small house. You're making this intentional decision. How would you not see they need it more than you need it? So that was the one thing. And then the other thing was the stigma of the mobile home, the trailer park conversation, and distancing from that conversation. And so it has always been, and to your point, it's always been eye-opening for me because I know the history. I know how, the conversation about housing and Black folks have been left out of that conversation. And so I'm always more sensitive to the overall conversation of others, marginalized, disenfranchised folks, in and how that is happening. But it was also so much of what you just said, not having to recognize outside of themselves to be able to say that, even put it in writing. That was like, oh, am I reading this? That you don't want to be associated? Like, you're okay with putting that in writing. And that was so disappointing to me. But it was also very eye-opening to me because I jumped into this movement, as I've shared, thinking we were challenging the status quo of housing, and that people who had not been included in the housing conversation were all of a sudden going to be included in the conversation. And that was absolutely not the case. And I was like, okay, Jewel, you were naive in that part.
But it's great that you are publicly trying to bring people's awareness to a higher level, because I mean, there's race is definitely involved, class is definitely involved. I mean, we don't talk about class in this country hardly at all.
Yeah.
And certainly now we probably won't for a while, but
oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It is even more in denial, but it's even more obvious now, but so many more folks are like, that doesn't exist. Are you kidding me? Like, look what is happening. Like, it is in your face, but okay. It's a wasted conversation. One of the questions I have, so there have, like, one of the 2017, 2018, there was this big conversation happening about tiny houses being an appropriation of poverty. And I understood it in a way, because of kind of just what I've just finished saying. The people in the movement were building their houses and talking about this new movement, this new phenomenon, but they were ignoring the fact that so many other folks already live this way because they have to, in poverty. And you're taking some of the same concepts, but you're repackaging it. And so that made sense to me. So again, for me, the thing that had to happen around that was an awareness, because if you know and you acknowledge, like I've acknowledged, I had some financial privilege in being able to take my money, have the job to build my tiny house. There was financial privilege there. And so I think awareness, being willing to talk about it, and being willing to do some work to help mitigate some of those challenges and bring some of those same people into this conversation is required. I got a question in all of this long thing. So they say that some folks say now that tiny houses are just a rebranded, trendy version of mobile homes that are now, more socially acceptable for a different demographic. Do you think tiny houses are kind of facing the same challenges, or do you see them as having more advantages?
Well, I am no tiny house expert.
No.
But I would say, I mean, I have been in, for example, a community in Oregon where the owner ripped out a whole bunch of mobile homes and put in tiny homes as their attempt at rebranding. Look, we are hip. We have tiny homes.
Yeah.
And they were garbage. And people were saying that, like sinks were literally falling off the walls. But but
Where did
because of
you say this?
whatever, sorry,
Where did you say this was?
outside of Portland, or probably in Portland,
Okay.
Oregon.
Okay.
So I think I guess initially when tiny homes became something, and if I'm saying something that's really ignorant, please tell me.
Oh, no, no, no.
But I think there was really this attempt to make a class distinction. We
Mm-hmm.
are trendy people, we are people of means, and we want to live this way,
Yes.
versus the mobile and manufactured housing community. They are destitute people and they have to live this way because of economics and whatever.
Right.
So
Exactly.
I think there are people that always want to say, well, I'm not that,
Yes. Yes.
for whatever reason they need to think that. But I mean, there are lots of there are similarities and differences between tiny homes and mobile homes and manufactured houses. So,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
people are where they are for all different reasons, some out of necessity, some because they think it's cool and trendy. So,
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's the nail on the head. We see tiny houses marketed as, a minimalist, sustainable lifetime choice, the intention there, and then there's the framing of mobile homes and trailer parks as like a last resort. You don't have an option. And so the narrative, like you're saying, is like, look at me, where I'm doing something. And then with the tiny house movement, either being 96% or 98% white, I've forgotten what the number was I saw. I need to try to find that statistic. It is this trendy hipster movement that looks totally different. What is it? Lipstick on a pig, when they say. that's, that's
oh.
so much of the conversation. Um,
Can I ask a question? So, are there communities of tiny homes that somehow people have come together as wanting community? Like, I know where you're at right now, it feels more comfortable. Are there communities? And I guess hopefully someone's looking at what is going on in the mobile and manufactured housing community area as a cautionary tale and not
yes. Yes.
falling into the same trap.
Yes, there are tiny house communities, for sure. A lot of the tiny house communities are being built on older RV parks, which in a way you can say it's gentrification of RV parks, but it's happening. Some of them fortunately are, no longer in existence. So they bought the RV park, not as your example, hopefully, as many where people are kicking folks out. But there are tiny home communities, and I think some of the outside of the conversation about zoning, that is more outside of our control, even though we're trying to change that conversation. Some of the lessons learned as we're building tiny house communities, takes it back to what the intent was initially around mobile home communities, for it to be community, not just individual people living in areas where they're not connected. And so designing the community so that it has the community space and gathering places for people, and that it's not just 10 people, 20 people living in this space and they're not engaging with each other, and they can then come together, like you mentioned, to keep the community up and handle issues together. The other thing that the lessons learned that we are incorporating, and so in that community, like designing it more park like, so that it has more of a feel of beauty, not just house, that type of thing. And some of the other things that have been call outs from the conversation is when the communities go into disrepair. And a lot of the communities, especially in the South, you'll see, inoperable cars and things just lined up and that type of thing. So designing it so that, almost like an apartment complex, so that the parking is more on the outskirts of the housing, and more the center of the community is the housing and the nature and walks and benches and that type of thing. So again, the focus more on community. And then another call out is that one of the big challenges that I am aware of with mobile home communities is the fact that once the home starts getting older and repairs are needed, it's not something the homeowner can really handle because the material, the metal that it's made out of. And so they need to have the monies to hire a professional to work on the house. It's not something that you can self repair and paint and do all of those things. So a lot of the way the community ends up going down is not necessarily that person's fault. It is the way the structure was built. And so the benefit that tiny houses have in that conversation is that it is a stick built home and you can keep it in better repair than a lot of the way the older mobile homes and trailers were built. So definitely taking some of those lessons learned in the communities.
And do you find if you're a tiny home owner, can you get bank loans to do repairs?
So that is where that is a parallel to the mobile home conversation in the lending challenges, because so we know HUD came in the late 70s and you could do they offered financing for mobile homes, but some of those same challenges in lending are in the same conversation with tiny homes, in that lending isn't currently available. You can't get a traditional bank loan. Most of the loans for tiny houses are either through personal loans, or the tiny house is built through with RVIA certification, so it's seen as an RV, so you can then get an RV loan for it, or that chattel loan that you mentioned is an option for some of the tiny houses, but it's still some of those same challenges. And then that also translate to a barrier for Black folks getting into the movement, because those financing challenges are different for white and
Sure.
Black, white and brown folks, and so that is a barrier. So it's so many parallels to the community and the conversation.
Well, I keep in this particular time, and probably in all times, I keep thinking, and this goes back to my experience with um, MH Action. Like, there's so many little movements that if people would join together instead of saying, "Oh,
Mhm,
we're tiny homes, we're not mobile manufactured homes,"
mhm,
if people would really join together, the more people are involved in trying to make a change, the more likely it is that the change could happen. And
absolutely.
it does, like the zoning issues or the impact on municipalities of all the things that I see going on, they end up paying more because the police need to be involved more, the board of health needs to be involved more, the zoning people need to be involved more. So it's like all these little pieces that are not working together, that if people could come together and say, let's make regulation that works for mobile and manufactured homes and for tiny homes and for apartment building dwellers and whatever, and let's make it the same standard for everybody, it would just work so much better.
That would be too much like right. Is if they can keep the people unorganized, if they can keep the people divided, then the folks with the money
Yes,
are able to benefit,
yes,
not the actual people. But the
yes.
concept of it is great in theory, the coming together. I saw somebody say that they wished HUD would offer vouchers for tiny houses. And I disagree with that, because then HUD gets involved in the manufacturing of tiny houses and has so much more control over tiny houses. So I personally, again, I'm not an expert, but my personal opinion is that I hope HUD stays far, far away from tiny houses.
Well, who
Um,
knows? They've been taken over also. So
now that's true. It might be several years down the road, they before it happens now, because everybody's got to recover, Everybody
Yeah.
is going to recover. And Evelyn, to your question, absolutely, all of this is intentional. We know that all of this is intentional.
But that's more reason for us to be in community with one another and not let them fracture us into camps that I'm not like you and you're not like me. So
yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. I agree.
divide and conquer does work every time, and boy, are they masters of it. You know,
Absolutely.
Oh, I have children of the pronoun generation, and just hearing like, you're not using pronouns right, you're not doing this right, you're not saying that right. It's like, my intention's good, I'm trying my best, and can't we all just be together and
Yeah,
try our best to be together instead of pulling apart like,
we
my
got to
parents didn't
respect.
say the pronouns right, so screw them.
Yeah, yeah, that conversation I think is a lot different because for so many that's a respect issue, and so
No, and I totally get it, and I try my best, but I'm old, and I do try my best, and I respect, but I screw up.
yeah, yeah. I think the key there is the recognition. It's not intentional. I
Yes,
apologize, and I'm here to learn. Versus
yes.
I'm old. I get to call you whatever. I
Well,
get
yes,
Yeah,
totally.
and you just have to deal with it. There's such a big difference in that.
Yes,
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 absolutely.
yes.
Absolutely. What about you? Based on your work, do you have any any input, any thoughts of what you need or what you would suggest for tiny house advocates to consider if we want tiny homes to remain accessible and a housing solution based on kind of the conversations that you've had with MH Action and the
Yes.
work that you've done?
Yeah, I would say primary is if there is another group that's a logical group of identity group to affiliate with that things could move ahead with, strength in numbers, and also learn from what is not working and what's really making mobile and manufactured housing communities vulnerable. A lot comes down to zoning and
Hmm.
um, it's perception and zoning. So I think definitely tiny homes have currently a perception leg up on mobile and manufactured housing. That could change at any time. But yeah, trying to figure out how to come in community with people and how to impact change, because it really requires, community level. I'm finding that so much of what's happening to people I know, it's not a national level problem because there's very little protection there. It's not a state level because it's very little protection there. It really comes down to the local municipality, and it's like the town of
Hmm.
this many people gets to make the decisions because that community is in that town. So people who are more like go to their community board meetings and things
Yeah,
and speak up and say, I live in this community and we spend this much money in this community and we are active members of this community, so don't treat us like
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
it's hard. I mean, it's the road is going uphill right now, so we, as I say, the more we can all work together to try to share information and work towards making the affordable housing crisis less of a crisis, the better. And
Yeah,
sometimes we have to give them, the whole NIMBY thing, like, oh, I want the density of my neighborhood to stay the same. Well,
yeah, yeah. It's the like what you said, the coming together, the having the conversations, the working together, zoning. There are So right now there's a lot of conversation happening within the tiny house movement to address code for tiny houses. Well, there's Appendix AQ, which is code for tiny houses on foundation that is already established. Now the work is on code for tiny houses on wheels, that same code, but now addressing tiny houses on wheels. And the next big thing has to be zoning. And that's going to be the big thing and the hard thing because um, folks are so resistant to change. It's going to be even, that conversation might even stop, right now based on where we are. But overall, when things aren't the shit show that they are right now, the there is just general resistance to change. And then there are the underlying, the underbelly folks who are still there from the old ways, who understand why things were that way and they don't want the change. um and then there has to be so much, like the single family zoning, which was developed to only have certain folks in these urban areas. And now that that has taken over so many cities, how do you even undo some of that? Like, where the zoning for mobile homes and trailers are relegated to outside the city limits, out in the rural spaces, the suburban rural spaces. Where I am now, I'd say, is more suburban than rural, but having like these can't be in the main areas because we don't want to see those types of
Same. Yeah.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah. I mean, this is a time that if we can use this time instead of getting discouraged to put building blocks together, like they have been great at the long game. Like we should be thinking about the long game and how can we build in community and understand what would be helpful and sort of start priming the pump so that when things do get improved, that we're ready. Like people know what they're asking for, that would make sense and be helpful, and how they can ask in a way that gets it improved, and how
yeah.
they can be involved in communities to help get it improved, rather than, right now we all feel like we should retreat, but this is actually against our best interest to do so.
Yeah, that is one of the things. So my community that shows up on Sundays, they are called the Soul Collective. And one of the things, as we were going into this change of administration, we've been focused and talking about how much community is necessary, and being in community just for our safety and sanity, for a big piece of that. And then um, for strategizing and networking. I have zero intentions of trying to go up against the bigger things, the racism. Like, that's not where my energy is best served. It's not anything that is healthy, physically, mentally, emotionally, none of those things. But being in community and continuing to do this work, continuing to have these conversations, um, to get some of this in now, to reemerge and be ready, and just take care of each other. I think that is this also part of the conversation that we've had in the development of community. Like, who is in the community, and are people looking and looking out for each other in community? There's some thought, and even when communities were segregated, people knew each other and kind of looked out for each other. Black communities were more intact because everybody knew each other and felt safe. And so now we're at this point where there's the uncertainty, because you don't know, especially for Black communities, you don't know what your neighbor is thinking right now, and are you safe? And so having to seek intentional community to make sure you're safe, and to make sure somebody is having your back and keeping you sane is going to be so important right now.
Absolutely. No, and I really treasure you're having reached out to me to have this conversation. It feels like coming together, as I keep saying, is going to keep us all going. So
Yeah,
yeah, finding your community, finding people who have your back, and figuring out what makes sense, what you can do, what you can't do.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
What's one question that I didn't ask that maybe you wish I had asked?
I can't really think of something off the top of my head.
Okay.
It seems like we've covered a whole lot of ground.
We did. We did. I told you. So a couple of weeks ago, I had a guest on here, my friend Adelia, and she was talking about financing, and we were also talking about we got started talking about mobile homes and manufactured homes and the stigma. And I was saying, I got a guest coming and I'm excited to talk to her about the mobile homes and the connection with tiny homes and all of the things. So I've been ready for this conversation. And I wanted to make sure we could cover all of the ground because there's just so much to talk about, and I wanted to not as much as possible touch on all of the things and not leave anything out. So thank you for the work that you do. Thank you for I love when I get to connect with people like outside of the socials and really get to have some real conversation and get to know that person. So I thank you for being willing and open to connecting with me and and having this genuine conversation.
Well,
Uh,
my pleasure.
Absolutely. So tell me, so I know you are doing all of the things, but if you were writing your biography, your autobiography, what would be the title of your autobiography?
Woof. She made a difference. I don't know. That's probably been taken, but I mean that's all. I don't know. I have two grown kids, a husband. At this point, I really just am hoping my work can make a difference. I don't like seeing people having their sense of security and home threatened so universally. Um, there's just there's got to be a better way, and it's, as I say, the road is not going the right direction for us right now. But
Right.
I think all we can do is hope we can keep working at improving things, and hope we live long enough to see it improve, or at least have planted the seeds to hope for the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Tell people how, so the information will be in the video. As you all know, I always share it, but tell people how they can find you, connect with you, support you, all of those things, please.
Yeah, so I have a website that's my name, just no capitals, no spaces. So KathleenTunnellHandel.com. If anybody's interested in seeing more of my work, I thank you for showing and touching upon it. I'm very passionate about it. They can look up MH Action on Instagram and just see what kind of work they're doing. And if you feel like supporting them, you can become a member for $25 a year, which is nothing. And it's not nothing. It's a nominal amount for what you get back in terms of community. And I think it would be interesting to learn from what's going on there and sort of always keep, field. And then they came for me. It's, the
Yeah.
communities are so linked. It's
Yeah.
definitely good to keep in touch. And of course I have an Instagram account, and a Facebook account, which I neglect because it just can be so
I'm
soul
getting,
sucking to
yeah.
maintain. And then I just keep doing my work. So hopefully if anybody sees anything of my work coming out, I have ambitions to do community presentations that bring in pro bono lawyers with artwork. So art and activism, bring people out of their individual spaces into a community space where they could really do what you're doing, and bringing people together, helping them learn, and learning to do things that maybe will help them stay safer. So
Yeah, absolutely. Um, there's a picture on your page. You were somewhere and you got to take a picture. Your work was on the wall, I believe. Where, tell us where that was, just in case somebody gets to see it.
that was probably what I'm thinking it must be, was at the MH Action National Gathering in DC in the fall of 2023.
Okay. Okay.
So that was, I think, when I did a pop-up exhibition of my work. Oh, or I did have a solo exhibition once at the Griffin Museum of Photography outside of Boston and Winchester, Massachusetts. But that's finished. I do have videos of that I'm someday going to edit, but
Yeah.
I have a lot of editing to do.
I got a long list of stuff over here to do, and sometimes I just
Yes.
walk past it. But yes,
Yes.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. And your community, I really appreciate it. And I will definitely come back to looking at the recording. I didn't get to see all the messages that were coming through, and I saw things like community garden and people giving suggestions, and I love that. So I'll go back and look at the comments that came through more thoroughly.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I need to get connected. I want to be more of a support for the surrounding, the connected communities, mobile homes, trailer parks being one of them, and then also be more in a position to learn, because just like you said, um the more people that are having the same conversation and supporting each other, the more we're able to accomplish. So I need to do that for sure. So thank you for that reminder and encouragement.
Yeah.
All right, good people.
Well,
I'm sorry, go ahead, Kathleen. What were you going to say?
I was just going to say thank you again, and thanks to your community. I've really enjoyed this and appreciate it. So
Absolutely.
thank you.
You hang on for just a second. Soul Collective community, folks, new folks. I saw some new names in the chat, all of that. Thank you so much for being here, for joining on Sunday, being the fabulous, fabulous community that you are. And we will connect again next Sunday. So y'all take care. Have a great week.
Bye.